Welcome to this lesson on class properties and methods in PowerShell. In this tutorial, you'll learn how to define the behavior of your custom classes by working with properties and methods. Properties store the data that describes your objects, while methods define what actions those objects can perform. Together, they form the foundation of object-oriented programming in PowerShell. By the end of this lesson, you'll understand how to create robust, functional classes that can model real-world concepts in your scripts. Let's start with properties. Properties are variables that belong to a class and store data representing the state of class instances. Think of them as the characteristics or attributes that describe an object. Properties can have type constraints, which means you can specify what kind of data they can hold, ensuring type safety. They support default values, so you can initialize them automatically when an object is created. You can also enable validation logic to ensure the data meets certain criteria. Essentially, properties define the attributes that make each object unique. Here's how you define properties in a PowerShell class. You start with the keyword class, followed by the class name, in this case, employee. Inside the class body, you declare each property with a type constraint in square brackets, followed by a $sign and the property name. For example, we have a string property called name, an integer property called employee, a string property for department, and a double property for salary. The type constraints ensure that only the correct type of data can be assigned to each property, preventing errors and making your code more reliable. Properties can also have default values assigned when you define them. This is useful when you want certain properties to start with a specific value. In this server class example, we have 4 properties. The name property has no default value, so it must be set when creating an instance. The status property defaults to the string offline, the port property defaults to the number 8080, and the isSecure property defaults to true. When you create a new server object, these properties will automatically have these values unless you explicitly override them. Now let's talk about methods. While properties store data, methods define actions and operations that objects can perform. Methods are functions that belong to a class and encapsulate functionality. They can accept parameters as input, allowing you to pass data into the method. They can return values as output, providing results back to the caller. Methods execute object actions, implementing the behaviors that make your objects useful. Think of methods as the verbs of your class, the things your objects can do. Here's how to define methods in a PowerShell class. In this calculator class, we have 2 methods. Each method definition starts with a return type in square brackets. The add method returns an integer and accepts 2 integer parameters, a and b. Inside the method body, it returns the sum of those 2 numbers. The multiply method also returns an integer and accepts 2 parameters, x and y, returning their product. Notice that methods have a clear structure: return type, method name, parameters in parentheses, and the method body in curly braces. This makes them easy to read and understand. Let's look at a complete class that combines properties and methods. This bank account class has 2 properties, account number as a string and balance as a double with a default value of 0. It also has 2 methods. The deposit method has a void return type, meaning it doesn't return a value. It accepts an amount parameter and adds it to the current balance using the $this keyword, which refers to the current instance. The withdraw method returns a Boolean. It checks if the balance is sufficient, and if so, subtracts the amount and returns true. Otherwise, it returns false. Notice how methods use $this property name to access and modify the object's properties. Let's review the key concepts. First, properties store object state with type safety, ensuring your data is consistent and reliable. Second, methods define object behavior and actions, implementing the functionality your objects need. Third, default values initialize properties automatically, making object creation simpler and more convenient. And fourth, use $this to access current instance members within your methods, allowing you to work with the object's own properties and methods. Understanding these concepts is essential for creating effective object-oriented PowerShell scripts. Practice creating your own classes with properties and methods to reinforce these principles.
If you like this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Visit CodeLucky.com for more such useful content.